Hi there, I'm Scott from Buy the Brush Miniatures, and today I'm going to show you how you can get started in the miniatures hobby. Now the first thing I want to say is it really isn't as expensive as people make it out to be. You can go way over the top and make it really expensive, but I'm going to show you today how you can start off by not buying all this stuff you don't need, because a lot of videos out there they'll say, oh, you need this, you need that, you need water effects. Without that you're not going to have a good hobby experience. No, it's just not true. I'm going to show you how you can get started. So it's going to be a very strictly beginner level video, and we're just going to show you exactly what you need step by step, and then maybe talk about how you can branch out from there. In this video I'm not going to talk about, say, which armies you're going to collect. If you jump into Warhammer 40k, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, Space Marines are the army you want to go for, or Eldar are the best army. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about strictly how to start the actual hobby side of things, so the modelling and the painting. So the first thing you're going to want to buy is you're going to want to buy the models themselves. Once you've put them together, they'll look a bit like this. They won't look exactly like this unless you've bought Eldar Guardians and you'll have 10 of them, but typically they're going to come in a box that looks a bit like this. It's not really going to fit in frame, but it's just a box all wrapped up, and you're not going to have them rolling around in that box. So you open the box and you look inside, this is what you're going to get. It's called a sprue. And then to get everything off the sprue, you're definitely going to need a set of these, which are straight edge clippers. The spring in mine's gone, but they're quite old. Normally it'll be like that and it'll have a spring to it, but these ones are a bit knackered, but they still work just fine. These are Citadel straight edge clippers, and they're called that because they have a straight edge there, and you want that so you can actually get as close to the model as you can there, and then clip. You don't want to have, you know, something with round edges. It just won't work. You can use any brand, but these are the Citadel ones and I just like these. The Army Painter ones are obviously a good option as well. So you're going to need a pair of straight edge clippers. Now you've cut everything out, now you just need to stick it together. Now this depends on what the models are made of. If the models are made of plastic, then I recommend a plastic glue. For this example I'm just using the Citadel plastic glue, and that's probably my favourite, but I haven't really tried many others. The Army Painter one is also a very good one. The best thing that offers is it doesn't come with this little needle here, and instead it comes in more of a pot, and it's more like you brush it on. So it just depends what you want. The needle can get a bit annoying and it gets clogged up very easily, so I might recommend the Army Painter one over this because it does the same thing. But if this does ever get clogged, a quick tip is just to put it in some hot boiling water and then leave it there for a few minutes, and it will clear it out. If the models are made of metal or resin, obviously plastic glue is not going to work on that, so you're going to need some super glue. Now I would absolutely never ever get Citadel super glue because it's just so rubbish. You kind of squeeze the tube, sometimes you'll not even get any out of the tube, and it comes in like a little box, and you get these little like classic super glue tubes. Not very good. This Army Painter super glue on the other hand's absolutely brilliant, and I would definitely recommend that for metal or resin models. Even if maybe you just would rather use super glue on plastic models, I would still recommend plastic glue, but if you fancy super glue, then Army Painter is the way to go. Now on the topic of building your models, I would recommend having one of these, but you don't necessarily have to, but it does make the final result much better, and that's a mold line remover, and this is a Citadel mold line remover. You can use a knife instead, use like the back of a knife. And this is basically for when you take it out of the sprue, sometimes it'll have this little line going along the cross where the mold was, and you can just use this to sort of scrape that off like that. So I'd recommend getting a mold line remover as well. So now you've built your models and they're starting to look something like this, but they're still grey, and that's something that we need to fix. Now before you start putting paint on, you absolutely need to prime your minis, and what that means is you put on, if you just start painting it on like this, for example, just painting it on the grey, it will start to come off, or it might not even go on very well originally because the paint doesn't actually adhere to the plastic very well at all. It will actually just come straight off. So what you're going to need to do is prime it, and what that does is the primer does adhere to it very well, and that allows the surface for you to paint on nice and smoothly. Now depending on the colour scheme you want to go with, you can prime it different colours, but I recommend either white, grey or black, and for this example I'm just Citadel's Chaos Black spray can, and it will always be a spray paint, your primer. I mean, People say you can prime it by hand, but you just can't really. It doesn't really work very well. So I recommend getting yourself a can of spray paint. After you've done that, you can get the actual paints themselves. It just depends on the colour scheme. You can just pick up a few paints. You don't need loads, you just need to think, what colours do I need? Get the colours on. You don't need to think of anything fancy like washes or anything when you're just starting out. Just get some paint on your minis and see if you enjoy it. Obviously, to put the paint on, you're going to need paintbrushes. Now, which paintbrushes you get, I can definitely put my recommendations, but there are cheap ones and there are expensive ones, and the differences are, with cheap ones, I'll see if I can find an example for you here. The bristles, they tend to just, they're very brittle, they're not very, you can see there, it almost feels like if I keep doing that, the bristles will just crumble. You can get Citadel ones, but I'm not a massive fan of them because they don't last very long. I personally use the Army Painter Wargamer ones, and these ones are absolutely brilliant, but they can be quite pricey, these ones. So Army Painter actually do a sort of beginner range. I think they call them Hobby instead of Wargamer. I don't know, that might be wrong, but yeah. And then you literally want to just buy based on the size. If you're a beginner, just buy based on the size, and you want a sort of good, as a comparison there, just a good decent size that you can cover your minis with. And then in addition to that, I also recommend getting a smaller, finer detail brush, just like that as well. The brushes you get, I prefer synthetic brushes, but regular brushes, they do work just fine. They just don't tend to last as long. So don't really worry about it too much. Just get yourself a decent brush, but don't go over the top. Now, on the note of paint, the types of paint themselves, along with the brush, they work together. So these ones here, they're just Citadel paints. They work really well, but it seems to me like the pots are just designed so that if you don't use them quite a lot, they will just dry out. And you can get something like Vallejo or Army Painter ones, and they actually come in sort of a dropper thing, like a bit like this super glue bottle, and you can drop the paint onto your palette. And on the note of palettes, I also recommend you get a palette, which is this thing here. You don't have to get a palette, but you can, and I always use a palette. You can get a wet palette. You can make your own wet palette. I'll probably make a video on that. Haven't yet, but there'll be videos out there if not. And it's basically used, you put your paint on the palette and then draw from the palette. It's just to control the amount of paint you have on your brush, because otherwise you're just going to have far too much on the brush and you're just going to end up clogging all the details on your minis, and it will just look a horrendous mess. And this palette here it just comes from the Citadel palette pad. It's not too expensive, and it's just a pad full of these palettes here, just like that. There, so that concludes everything that I think you should get to start off the hobby. And now it's not a massive pile. It's just a couple of brushes, some paint, glue, models, primer, palette pad, and that's not even a must, just like the mold line remover, not even a must, but the clippers as well, straight line, straight edge clippers. So there, that concludes everything. I'd really appreciate it if you follow some of the links in the description below to support us, and again, thank you for the view and subscribe for more.